this session is Caring for the Caregiver. And we have a panel of experts. And when I say experts, I mean we have moms who need to be cared for, and we have some pretty awesome people who facilitate caregiving or helping moms to get care. I've told you all this morning about like kind of when I realized I needed to have a conference for people like us was after we had seen Dr. Chris. This is Dr. Chris Colgren. So that's her. And then in another session, I talked about Vicki, and this is Vicki and Danielle. And the three of them are caregivers, or they're not the caregivers. They are the practitioners, and I don't like using that word. I don't know if I want to use that word. And then I have Siobhan, who is a sickle cell mom, and I adore her. She was my big reason for wanting to make tomorrow's afternoon's conversation about equity in healthcare a thing, because of a story she told me at family camp that literally blew me away. Wendy Wilson, I met as a mom when Faith very first was diagnosed. She was this woman who had her entire family in the hospital with her, and they were from Ohio, and they lived at, I thought they were crazy. They brought their whole family with them, and they lived in a hospital, literally lived in a hospital. I mean, they stayed at Ronald McDonald House, but they were there always, and they always had these crazy meals, like these crazy spreads of food that the people from their church just delivered. And then, of course, Kathy Prout, the famous Larry Prout's mom. Kathy is, I call my medical mama sister. We are the closest parents. She's the closest mom in proximity to me. And if something's wrong at 3 a.m., she's the first person I reach out to, because we kind of get each other.
We never sleep.
Neither of us
sleep.
That whole self-care thing we both are kind of bad at. So we kind of are going to take the conversation. First, I want to talk to the moms and ask a little bit about how you do, like how you're doing with self-care, like what do you think, I think that some of it, Larry's mom and Mia's mom and I have been at this a long time. So our kids have been sick a long time, and we're all at least 10 years or close to 10 years for Mia. And we want to make sure that you kind of learn a little bit from the experience we have. I didn't get help for myself or my kids quick enough. I should have done it earlier. And just kind of open up the discussion about what you can do for self-care that will not only help you, but probably in the long run help your kids. Because I felt like in my last session when we were discussing what you can do for self-care, the parents really started listening when they heard, oh, this is going to help my kid too. So I think that the reality is it's so hard to care for ourselves. But the minute you hear that taking care of yourself is going to positively affect your child, I think that it makes you want to tune in a little more. So Wendy, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell me a little bit about why you have trouble taking care of yourself first? And I asked Wendy because I kind of think she's the best at it, truthfully, of the three of us moms, or four of us. And I think that she might be the best of the bunch of us, so.
So the question is, why do I have trouble? Or is that what your question is?
How do you feel about your ability to take care of yourself?
I think we probably all fall short. But I mentioned this, a little bit to you guys yesterday, is that, we are, well, let me preface this by saying, so our daughter has a congenital heart defect, among a lot of other things, GI issues and pulmonary and endocrine, and anyhow, all that to say, she has spent a very long time in the hospital. Her first 11 and a half months of her life were in the hospital. And and many more times since then. That was in 2011 and 2012. And through that whole process, we had a really amazing little, I think we all have these like clippets of like aha moments when we have kids who are fragile, medically ill. And this one doctor said, make sure along the way that you and the team of doctors are doing things for Mia and not to Mia. And that was really helpful for my husband and I along the way, just to try to really decide, like, are we just doing this test just to do it, or is this actually something that is going to help her in the long run? And then so kind of along those same lines, that got me after, a year of being in the hospital, and then finally getting home. And essentially, palliative care just wanted to get us home. We were waiting for her to die, if I'm being perfectly honest. But that obviously didn't happen. She is 9 now. We still deal with a lot of stuff. But anyways, all that to say that along the way, then we started making these decisions like, okay, well, we were keeping her in a bubble. And not that we don't still have to do that occasionally, but we didn't save her life so that she couldn't live. And so that was for her, our kind of, mantra for her, that, okay, what can she do? What things can we experience as a family? We were homeschooling our kids. My husband was working from home just to try to keep germs away and things like that and keep her safe. But what could we do? And so then this is a long answer to get back to me. So that applies to me too. Like, yes, we have a medically fragile child, and it does affect the entire family, myself, my husband, her 3 sisters. But what can we do as a family or as an individual so that we still live? We're still living, so let's live. So that's kind of the path of how we got, to this point. It didn't happen overnight, and I still have trouble and I struggle and I get worried, but that's kind of how we've gotten to this point.
Yeah, I think that whole living, like, you didn't keep her alive to not live, is like, that's such a strong statement.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kathy.
Hello.
So Kathy's my girl, and Kathy struggles with self-care, I know, and it weighs on her. It just does. Can you talk a little bit about feeling like you have to choose between taking care of the family and taking care of yourself?
Yeah. A little bit about Larry real quick is when Larry was born, he had multiple complex medical issues. His organs are on the outside of his body. He had no skin from his rib cage to his rectum. On top of that, spina bifida, cloacal exstrophy, short gut syndrome, different things like that. So he was our Humpty Dumpty. They were always putting him back together. And through it all, he would get very bad blood infections, pneumonia, sepsis, things like that. The first maybe 12 years of his life were the hardest. And then after that, we would start having these little gaps of things would be going well. And then, and that's when my husband got sick with he had his colon removed in 2005. And then he developed a liver disease as a byproduct of having ulcerative colitis. He developed primary sclerosing cholangitis. And so he has some medical issues. It's almost like God helped Larry get a little better then so that we could deal with big Larry. He's right there. But anyway, I think that with me, what was really hard was we had 6 children, and the oldest at the time of Larry's birth was 13 on down. She kind of became the mother. We had neighbors that would try to help. We had family that lived far away and sometimes would help, but being far away, it wasn't easy. We had a lot of people that just wanted us to be okay. So when they would ask us how things were going, because this is a lifelong thing with Larry. So even after the first few years, they'd say, so everything's better now, right? Things are going well, right? And we'd have people that would give me advice, take care of yourself, sleep when he sleeps, do this, do that. And I'd always be like, how am I going to do that? I didn't feel like unless my family felt good I didn't feel good. So I started to lose my identity, and my identity was my family. So if they were good, I thought that was how I was taking care of myself, because, Larry's feeling good today, or the older kids, everything's in line for them, or my husband's health is all right. Well, now I can feel good. But then when things would go smooth, I'd have a complete depressive crash because I didn't have anything to do for a while. And if I don't have something to do, I didn't know what to do. So I really didn't know how to take care of myself. And my husband, thankfully, was always pushing me. We're a pretty good team here. We have our older kids, everyone helps. And my husband was always pushing me, but I just couldn't. I gave up hobbies. I used to love to do furniture. I didn't exercise. I didn't go out with friends. Friends stopped asking me to go out. My identity was, are my children happy? And that was it. Until I'm better now, as my kids have gotten older and moved out. And as I had a friend reach out who owns a gym, and she's let me go work out there for free, except during COVID. So it was the first time I've worked out in years, and I'm back to refinishing furniture, and we have chickens in the backyard and honeybees, and we're really doing more, both my husband and I, not just me, for ourselves. It's hard though. It's really hard. I mean, you don't sleep at night. Marianne knows you don't sleep. I have massive panic attacks. I was always holding it together, but I had a heart attack in May, where I went in for a heart attack, every symptom for a heart attack. And it lasted about 7 to 10 days. And then we realized it was a massive panic attack. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It was awful. So things are better, but it's an ongoing thing.
So I am going to go to Dr. Chris because you say some things that I've sat in her office and talked about with my family before. So I want to give her the opportunity to talk for a second. But I think the big thing is, I've heard 3 times today and twice in preparation for this conference, I do so well when my child is acutely ill. So we all have these kids who are chronically ill. And when they're really sick, we do so well. But it totally messes with your brain, because you're like I don't know what it is. Is it a high? Is it a survival? Is it your adrenaline flowing? Like Faith got sepsis this summer, and I was fine in the hospital. But the minute I got home, like you would have thought I caught sepsis from her, because I physically felt so sick from, like, I was depressed, I was scared, I felt sick. So I'm wondering, what is that? What is it that helps us perform so well when they're so sick, and then when things are going really well, we kind of fall apart?
Survival, right? If you are going to do whatever you need to do to keep your child healthy and to save their life. And so you go into survival mode, right? People can, lift cars off of people when they're, in survival mode. They can do amazing feats of strength and other things. And I think moms are no different, right? You go into survival mode, you're not thinking, you're just doing. And most of you who have, for whom this is not your first rodeo, like, the drill, right? The drill, you get the kids in the car, pack your stuff, you go, the fastest route to the hospital, and you're on autopilot. The problem is our bodies are not physiologically made to sustain that, right? And so when the crisis is over, there's often that crash, because you've had all this adrenaline that got you pumping to keep everybody safe, and then it's gone, right? And so, I'm not surprised to hear that, Kathy, you mentioned it, Marianne, like that you feel sick, and you physically aren't well, and maybe even emotionally aren't well after you've been through that kind of extreme crisis. So it's really hard, especially when you have multiple crises, right? I mean, this is not just a one-off thing. It's these repeated kind of traumas and need to get yourself sort of in that physiological crisis mode, over and over again.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to say, and Marianne, I'm sure, and any Wendy as well, any parent of a child or even a family member that's sick, is I honestly feel like the only time I can take care of myself really well is when Larry's in the hospital. When he's inpatient, unless he's so sick, unless it's like an ICU situation and then you're just all rattled. But when Larry's going in for a surgery where it's like, oh, he's okay, he can do this, I take a book to read, I take my favorite slippers, I buy a million snacks, and it's like a bed and breakfast. And then I feel so guilty because I'm like, my son's in the hospital, but he is doing okay when I do this. But that's really the only time where I'm like, I can sleep, unless he's real sick. I can sleep better. It's like I find out where the warm blanket cupboard is and get a bunch of blankets for myself and Larry. And it's wild. But when he's inpatient and things are going okay, it's my bed and breakfast. Strange, I know, but
I think the other flip side of that too is when you're in the hospital and you're in a situation, you're in the situation, you know what it is. Once you get home, then you're like waiting for the next thing to happen. So there's that anxiety of when you're in the hospital, you know what it is that you're dealing with. When you're at home, you're waiting for the next thing to happen.
Siobhan, can you tell us a little bit about your situation with your daughter and how you deal with self-care? Because I love that you've turned your self-care into something positive, just as a side note.
It's interesting. Kennedy is my youngest daughter. She has sickle cell disease, and I think what one of the things that Marianne and I were talking about was like, why did you start a nonprofit organization? Well, there were a couple of reasons. One of them was because sickle cell disease is one of the most common inherited blood disorders, but yet it's the least funded. And I wasn't okay with that. I wasn't okay with them being like, well, she's 1 year old and we're working on some things and, just wait. And I was just like, no, I want to be a part of the solution and let's sort of figure that out. What I realized is that as I was being a part of the solution, it was so helpful for me personally. Like it wasn't just about Kennedy anymore. It was about the millions of people who are impacted by sickle cell disease worldwide, and the people that I've met, the parents that I've met over time. It was about that. And so that really did help me originally to sort of put things in perspective, but to also to work on something that was going to be helpful to not just myself, but to other people. It was just weird thing, but it was comforting for me. And then to do that, and not just do that, to have what I call my insurance job. So my 9 to 5 job that helps pay some bills, right? And then Kennedy's Village, and then the children, and oh yeah, and I do have this husband. It was like all of those things that were coming to play. I was just like, okay, now I'm overwhelmed, but I still want to be a part of the solution. So what do I do for myself? And I remember listening to someone on the radio about something totally different, but they were saying they were going to write a book, and they said, I realized I didn't have hours to write a book, but I had 30 minutes. And I was just like, I got 30 minutes, like it was one of those things where it was like, okay, I could do whatever this thing is for a little while. And so now with COVID and us being, me working from home and things of that nature, I use my drive time to work out. And I find it that some days where I think to myself, I'm not doing that today. Like today, I was like, nope, I'm not working out today. But then I was like, I'm going to get on camera and maybe I could like not look as big in the face if I worked out for this 15 minutes. So like in the middle of my day, I got up and I did do that, but it was the energy that I got from doing something else. And even though at Kennedy's Village is still with sickle cell and it's still advocating and still it was the energy, it's the energy from doing something else, not specifically for my child. And it's weird, but it's the energy that I get from that that sort of inspires me to have some additional self-care. And so, like I said, I do. And let's not think like, oh, Siobhan's working out in the morning for hours. No, there's like this app that I have. It's like 15 to 20 minutes, and but that's what I try to do most of the day. And so that's what I find myself doing. The other thing is Kennedy's Village, but my personal village is really awesome. And I really have allowed myself to be honest with the people around me, to say, I'm having a tough time. Kennedy lately, with the weather changing and some things are happening, she's had some pain crises where we've been able to manage them at home, but she's had one every night for the past 4 nights. And to watch your little kid go, okay, and to try to help her advocate for herself and her to go, okay, this is a pain crisis where I need my heating pad. This is the one where I need the medicine. And to watch that, and people to go, how you doing? And I usually go, I'm fine, I'm okay, everything's okay, because there are a lot of parts of me that are expected to be fine and okay, and I'm the warrior in our home, and I'm the one that makes sure everything's together. But I have people, when they say, how are you, or you're okay, I can go back and go, I'm not fine and I'm not okay. And I really hold on to those individuals. And I have a friend of mine who, she said, I'm just checking on you. And she could tell in my voice that there was something wrong. And she sent me like this care package of like self-care, like facial creams and things of that nature, and a face mask and things like that, that I wouldn't have done for myself. But it's because I could be honest. Like, I picked those people to say, you're my personal village, and I'm going to say to you, I'm not fine. Because we're so used to saying we're okay, because we're so used to taking care of everyone else. But we can't, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of them. And so I realized that I could say, I'm not fine. If I have to go to the hospital, do you need me to go with you? No. It's like, no, I got it. And it's like, yes, I do. I need someone while I take care of her. That would be great for me. Now, I agree with Larry's mom. Really, honestly, Mott's is like those warm blankets and stuff. So sometimes I'm kind of like, I can get through it by myself and like have some quiet time. I don't need you to come with me. But if I'm having a really hard time, so I guess those are the two things I would take away. Is I do try to have that 30 minutes for myself.
Yeah.
And then I do, if I'm in the midst of something, say to somebody, I picked people to say, I'm not fine. And even if I start off to say I'm fine and we have the conversation, I'll remind myself, be honest. Are you fine? Are you okay? And I'll say to those people, I'm not okay. And the expectation isn't that they're going to magically fix it, but the release of that honesty has been really helpful for me.
Yeah,
So
that's
I hope
great.
that answered your question.
You got it together, girl.
No, listen,
You
she's
feel like
only 4. I mean, some people. I mean, there are some warriors on this call right now with kids who are much older than mine, and doing some things. I'm just starting out and learning from everybody. I mean,
just don't stop talking.
no
That's
pun intended, but it takes a village, so
I'm kind
yeah.
of like Larry's mom. I don't tell anyone what's going on until I have to. Vicky, who's one of our presenters today, probably 2 years ago, she paid for a conference for me and said, "You're going to this self-care conference." And I was like, "Did you pay for this?" She's like, "Yeah." And I was so irritated with her because I was like, why would you pay for something that I don't want to go to? And she's like, you've got to go. And I was mad. And I was like, I don't want to go to this thing. And she showed me the sessions. And I was like, this is all hocus pocus. And fine, I'll go. In the first session, I sat in the back with Vicky's daughter and giggled like a 5-year-old. And I'm not even kidding when I say that. We were in a session where they were doing these bowl things, these ringing bowls. And I couldn't stop myself. Like, I could not contain myself. I had to leave the room. But then I went to Danielle, who's right next to Vicky's session on tapping. And Danielle said, first of all, she has a kid with some special needs. So I felt like she got me right away. I was like, she gets me. She totally understands what's up. And she said, I can give you something you can do while sitting behind the wheel of the car. And I was like, I can do that. I can sit behind the wheel of a car because that's a good place. That's about how much time I had to do self-care. So I went to this session and then I decided I was going to be an expert at this. I did it for about a year. It was great. But Vicki, can you talk about how to call people out? Because I know Larry's mom, I'm constantly looking at her thinking, girl, you've got to tell me you're not okay before the fact. But we don't. I still don't. We've been working with Dr. Chris for a long time now. I still, right now, I have this terrible pain right here. And you would think it was because we have this big conference this weekend. It isn't. It's because Will told me something this week that really upset me. And I don't want to talk about it. So can you talk a little bit about that, please, Vicki?
Sure. So I'll start by sharing I'm a pastor and Danielle is a mindfulness practitioner. And a few years ago, I was a chaplain at St. Joe's Hospital. And one of the things we learned while being a chaplain is the importance of the mind, body, spirit connection. Well, that just happens to be right up Danielle's avenue as well. So when I was called to the church that I'm serving at right now in Ann Arbor, we presented this idea to a group of people that we should really focus on mind, body, spirit health. And church world people kind of looked at us like we were witches. And so they didn't want any part of it, right? So we're like, well, let's show you. So that's why we created these conferences to teach people, what does self-love actually look like? Because, so I'm a Christian, and the greatest commandment in the Christian world is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And often we just think of love God, love your neighbor. And I got done preaching one day and I was walking out of the church, or Danielle was walking out of the church, and she looked at me and she said, well, you teach people how to love God and you teach people how to love themselves or love others. When do you teach them how to love themselves? And it was like a punch between the eyes. And I thought, I don't know, because I'm awful at loving myself. I don't know. So she called me out. And it was at that point that Danielle started coming in to see me every week. And she started doing Reiki. And so when you think of self-care, I'm an athlete in my mind. So for me, self-care is working out. But what I learned through Danielle, I learned through being a chaplain, it's not just the working out. It's also the mindfulness aspect, the spiritual side, and the body. And so when you put all three together, that crazy triangle is necessary to have you really flow. So it's taken me a couple of years of Danielle working with me looking at my ugly side and going like, ooh, little Vicki wants to talk about that because that's not fun. And really facing things that I didn't want to. It was easier. I'm a giver, right? I give to the community. I give to my family. I'm always giving. I go 100 miles an hour. Stopping was not my strong suit. I was asked in preparation to be a pastor if I meditated, and I was like, yeah, for like 15 seconds. That's about all I could do it. And in these last few years, as I've learned these modalities on how to focus within, how to love myself, what I realize is when I love myself first, I can receive God's love. And when you can receive love because you know you're worth that love, the love you can give to your family and to other people is exponential. It's a different depth of love. But it comes from me being able to look in the mirror first and saying, I matter. I matter enough that I have to do this for me right now, because then I'm going to be worth so much more to you. And when Danielle taught me a lot of this, as I started practicing it in my own life, and then as we started to now teach this to other people, we take people who are in trauma situations, and we don't really have a great word for it. We call it wonder twinning. We bring people together, and I pray and keep sacred space. And Danielle does one of her modalities, which could be tuning forks or Reiki or tapping, as Marianne mentioned. And we watch as something changes inside these people. So now that I've become aware of what a wreck I was a couple years ago, it's easy for me to call people out because somebody called me out. And so it changed my life. And so once you've been called out and your life has changed, it's easy for me out of love to want to say to another person, Marianne, get your butt to this conference, because I love you enough that I want you to feel like I'm feeling. And as we've watched this, we've helped, I don't even know how many people at this point. It's been amazing that we now have people coming back, right? And now we see the repercussions of the self-care, how it's playing out in their own families. And when I look out at all of you who are weary and weathered because of the amount of love you're pouring out of an empty tank, my thought is, I want at you. Like, I want to fill your tank. I want to help you to look at yourself and say, man, God created me perfectly for this moment, for such a time as this, to care for this child. But that means I have to be loved as a child first, and I have to be cared for. And we did in our last session, we did about prayer. We're not talking about hour long. We're talking about a few minutes a day. There are meditations that are like 6 minutes. Even I can do those meditations. So there are things that you can do that do not take a lot of time, but will reap amazing benefits.
Like I was showing on mine, I wear this necklace here. It's called a love tuner. And it is a little tiny tuning fork, basically. It's 528 hertz, which is the frequency of love. I wear it with me. And when in the moment I'm feeling stressed or panicked, you just remember to breathe, because we all forget to breathe. We do shallow breathing. And you literally just pull it out of the necklace and
I would be blowing that thing all day.
well, there's sometimes I'm like, but then I laugh, right? I start laughing at myself. And sometimes that's all you can muster up, is to just laugh at yourself. And even that starts to change your mood. And it's better than pounding on the steering wheel or, you know, something like that, or pulling out your hair or grinding your teeth so much that you crack and break them. So it's little things like this, or Vicki even says the rocks that she has in her pockets.
Yeah, I carry rocks.
I did that. I broke a tooth. I did that. Stressed. I broke a tooth. Yeah.
Yeah, my 3 front teeth are all broken from grinding.
Mouth guards, right?
Yeah.
Because we grind so bad at night. So, you know, when you talk about how you fall apart when things seem to actually be going smoothly, it's often because your immune system is what poops out. It's like people who finally go on vacation and then they're like, oh my gosh, now I have the flu. Seriously? I'm in Florida and I have the flu. Well, it's because your immune system is like, oh, thank goodness. Like, you've stopped. Like, I have nothing left to offer you or give you. So you have a week now. You've given me permission to relax, and all the bacteria and viruses can just have at you now, because I don't have to keep you in survival mode. And so there's that whole thing of familiar and unfamiliar. And you need to start changing that mindset of making what's unfamiliar familiar to you. So when you get caught up in the familiar part of, I know how to do this and I can package this way and I can go here and this is how it all works, it's how do you then translate that to after all of that is done? And that's when what becomes familiar is, where is that self-care? So when you do finally have that break and that time, finding these little modalities that you can do that becomes familiar, that's an easy go-to, that you're like, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to meditate now? How do I do this?
Yeah.
Little by little, train yourself. So when you get that 5 minutes, you can catch your breath for 5 minutes, or you can tap for 5 minutes, or, you know, I'm saying at a red light. I mean, people have seen me in my car and I'm actually tapping about them. Oh my gosh, could you drive any slower? I have to be somewhere. But I promise you, by the time I get there, it works. So it's learning these little techniques to build into your daily life, including wearing a whistle.
I'm getting one of those whistles. Chris, I'm going to direct this at you. One of the, so Dr. Newman is FACE attending doctor, and she's who said, you've got to go see Dr. Chris. And I was irritated because I thought, one more specialist. That's exactly what we need now, one more specialist. And Faith had gone to some kind of psychiatric person before, and she gave me some solutions, and I was so irritated because none of them were realistic. It was like, yeah, sure. As soon as Faith gets healthy, I'll be sure to do those things. And my very first appointment with Faith and Dr. Chris, what I loved about her is we were kind of telling her where we were, and she was like, and I said, and people expect me to be able to have normal conversations, and they expect me to be able to go out and do fun things, and they expect her to, just keep being her cheerful little self. And she was like, well, that's not your reality, is it? And she didn't like minimize the fact that, I don't like when you have a practitioner that wants to just pretend like it's all okay. Like it's fine. So like she like was really comfortable helping us find strategies in the situation we were in, which is what has really saved our family. And so my question I want to direct towards you is, can you think of some early strategies to give some of these parents that would help them walk in the way of self-care, like start to head down that road? And why? Like why? And I needed the why it was important for Will and Faith, because still to this day, guys, even though I know I should be taking care of myself, I have Faith, Will, my dog, my mom, Dennis, my coworkers. My job is super important to me now. And then me, like then I start thinking about myself. But guess what? With my life right now, I never get there. Like I never get there. So I want to maybe give a couple strategies to the parents after you tell us why it's important for our kids. Because you said a few things to me that was like, oh, she's so right. I hate it. I hate that that's so right.
I hate when I'm right too. Not really. No, I think, and thanks for all the nice things you said about me. I think, first of all, as you're talking about those things, I think a lot of it comes down to your values, right? And what is important to you as a parent. And I think as long as we as parents are operating within our value system as parents, we can find ways that taking care of ourselves fits within those values, right? So like for me, I really value having my kids be able to cope well with stuff and not lose their cool when they're in high stress situations. And so because I value that, I really have to figure out ways as a parent to be the person who models that, right? And shows them how to do that. So that's important. I think understanding not just your values, but why self-care is important, right? I think, I encounter this a lot with parents in the hospital, and, somebody, by the time I get to someone has already told a parent they need to take care of themselves, right? So it's not the first time they've heard it, and they are sick of hearing it. They don't want to hear it anymore, right? Because it feels like this thing that's incredibly unrealistic and to be honest, sometimes really patronizing, right? Like it's very easy for me to come in, and I don't have my act together, but people think I do because I, work here and I dress nice and, I speak clearly most days. And, so people think I have my act together, but I don't. It's really easy for me to say how you should live your life and take care of yourselves. And I can't, right? I think when you as a parent realize the importance of self-care for your kid, and I think this was mentioned earlier, the phrase that I always think of, and I talk to parents a lot about, is that you're only as good to your kids as you are to yourself. And a lot of times when I say that to folks, that's the light bulb. Like, oh, like I'm not really doing it for me, I'm doing it for my kid. And I think that's often the sales pitch that gets parents through the door. It's like, oh, well, I'm not taking care of myself for me, I'm doing it for my kid, right? And it's so true, because if you are, hanging by your very last thread, you can't take care of your kids in the way that you can, when you're at better, not to mention your best. And so I think really trying to figure out what your why is about why you need to do self-care. Can I ask a question of Kathy? I know I'm not supposed to be facilitating, but
No,
I can't
please
help.
do.
Kathy, can I ask you a question? You mentioned kind of going through this period of time where you were putting everybody else first, and you weren't taking care of yourself, especially when Larry's medical needs were much more acute. And I'm curious about, like, what advice would you have for parents who are going through that now? Like, what would you have done differently? Like, what does, Kathy now, what would she say to younger Kathy about how you could have done things differently back then?
So probably I would have trusted more people that wanted to help. I think because Larry was so chronic, it is really hard to trust people to come into the home, and care for your child that's on oxygen and has IV lines and nose tubes. And I mean, he was pretty complex. We would have people, it was just so hard to trust anybody. And also I was a control freak. I felt like I was the only one who could make it okay. My husband is a special education teacher. He has many resources. He's phenomenal, but I didn't even want him. I wanted to be in charge. I needed to control everything. I think I should have given up more control to my husband. I should have not, I hate the term helicopter mom. And maybe that's what I was, because even with my older kids, I was always wanting to make sure, I needed to make sure everyone was okay. And if they weren't okay, I wasn't okay. And I should have backed off more. When people would suggest things like, oh, take a vacation or do this, I would just want to, how am I ever going to do that? It's kind of like Marianne was saying, like, you get these unrealistic offers. Maybe I should have tried doing that. But I really felt like if I didn't control everything, Larry would have died, that I was the one keeping him alive. I mean, I watched the doctors. I went over everything. I was his advocate, and it was really hard. It was such a nonstop moment. It was no way to give it up. And for me, when I get energy, it's a weird thing too. Like, I don't want any of my kids to have problems. But I remember when, like, if they had a boy-girl problem or something with school, or, we have an older son that has some issues. When they gave me energy, like, oh, I can work on this, I can help you, I can brainstorm, I can problem solve. And it got to be that was the only time I felt good. And maybe it's because that was the only time I felt needed. I don't know. I think I should have given things up more. I should have backed off and let other people have control. Did I get an A?
I think that in our talk yesterday, we discussed how I think all parents lose themselves in some way when you become a parent, because you're so focused, you're hyper focused on your kids. I think parents of sick kids really lose themselves, because it's funny because you said that you have to keep him alive. I have always felt that way about Faith. Like, it's my job, and I have to watch every nurse that touches her line because they might give her an infection, or you can't touch her ostomy bag because she gets skin breakdown. Or so I get that. Like, but I realize, I think now, that was more about me. I remember there was a girl I went to high school with, was a nurse when Faith was 4, and we was first diagnosed. And she said to me, please let people help you. She says, I watch moms like you all the time, and this will ruin your life. And I remember, like, honestly, I unfriended her on Facebook, which is terrible. But I was like, she is not my friend. I cannot believe she said that. This isn't going to ruin my life because my kid is sick. And now, 10 years later, I'm thinking, she was trying to protect me. She was trying to tell me that this is super serious if I don't let people help me. And I'm telling you, I feel it in my body. I feel it in the way I breathe. Everything about me has changed. And most of it's not for the better. I mean, it really isn't. And I think that letting your child's health, like, be a detriment to your own is what you can learn from some moms that have been doing this a long time.
So to say something to all of that, so back in 2016, I spent a year every day waiting in a waiting room with my son every morning. For 4 to 5 hours, I would have to sit in this chair and wait for his treatment and his therapy and stuff to happen. And I was resentful and frustrated and angry and all of those things. And he finished in, was like the end of March. And then on April 12th, when I finally had time to do something for myself and go to these doctor appointments that I kept putting off, and I wasn't feeling good and I hadn't been, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so then I spent the next year going through all of that. And I was so mad, thinking I finally was done and ready to like move on for me. And now here I am dealing with this. And I think, you know, that's part of, right? Like I was in survival mode up until then, and then I wasn't. And I can tell you that when you don't take care of yourself and you don't listen to your body's signals and such, it is so much harder to heal. If you want to talk about a time suck, trying to heal from something that you now physically have versus going to a yoga class or going for a walk outside or, you know, going for that glass of wine with a girlfriend. I mean, how, that's not like that's a miserable thing to do, but I wasn't doing it. I had nothing left to give anybody at the end of the day. And I paid a pretty big price for that. So I tell that story to help motivate people sometimes to just, you know, because I think someone said, right, your husband got sick afterwards, you know, and had his moment. And a lot of that is the stuff that we hold in and that we don't let out, and our bodies start to fail us. And then I was no good to anybody for that year, because then it became all about me. And then I stressed out, you know, my kid, and then trying to explain that to my son, what was happening when he didn't understand, you know, now why his mom's sick. And
So yesterday we talked a little bit on the panel discussion that's actually going to follow this, about we avoid people because we don't want to talk. And my best friend, I think she's here. I don't want to hook up with her because this summer Faith got super crazy sick, and I know she's going to want to know about it, and I don't want to talk about it. And Wendy said, we don't want to talk about stuff. And, and Kathy said, we don't want to talk about stuff. So Chris or whoever wants to take this, like, what do you suggest for those of us parents? Bridget also said this. She doesn't want to talk about it. Like, we want to get out, we want to socialize, but we can't. Like, we just cannot go there with people at sometimes. We just can't. We can't, like, it's too hard to talk about, too upsetting to talk about. But how do you balance self-care and survival? Because I feel like we're kind of trying to do both.
I'll take this a little bit. So I don't have a chronically ill child, but I have a friend that has a chronically ill child.
About me.
So we don't necessarily want to have you talk about that. Well, there's a ministry of presence. Part of the beautiful thing is just being with you and not having you rehash everything you go through. So some of the best moments I've had with you, Marianne, is when we go to a Pentatonics concert. I can't talk to you in the middle of that, right? But at the same time, there's like, I'm with you, and there's togetherness and there's connection. And it doesn't have to, your world always revolves around your ill child. But when you're with somebody else, it doesn't have to still revolve around that. That whole point of us that coming in is we want to remove you from that for a moment. So I don't know how you cut that tie, but I will tell you, as a recipient of your conversation, I don't need you to tell me that.
Yeah.
I'm there to care for you.
Bridget.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Bridget.
Yeah.
Can you weigh in here about how hard it is to socialize?
And that's going to come as a shock to some of the North Star Reach staff because I'm a very extreme extrovert. It has been, you mean socialize with my current group of friends, or how it's been just hard? I mean, I don't want to, like, if people are going to watch the next session, I'm trying to not take up too much of what we talked about yesterday. I have found that I want to talk to people about what's happened. I did a lot of writing. We had a blog when Jack was sick. My son Jack had a liver transplant when he was 18 months old. My husband was a donor. And we had, my daughter was a newborn, 3 weeks old. And now we're 9 years post-transplant, and he's doing fabulous, knock on wood. So I wrote a lot during the early days. We kept a blog. So I didn't necessarily talk with people in person, but I found a way to share. I found that as time went on, it was incredibly difficult for me to open up to people because I felt like they just couldn't understand that. And also it was really hard to share. And over the past couple of years, I understand why. When you've experienced so much trauma, watching your child get sick and almost die, and it's really too hard to talk about it. That the pain is so raw and the grief is so deep that I found times where I was like, if I start talking about this, I'm gonna have a total breakdown. Like I couldn't share and it just be surface sharing. I had some people I could, but over time it started to feel more isolating. But I realized something today, Marianne, after talking to Kathy and Wendy yesterday. During COVID, it's gotten a lot more challenging with my friends who don't have kids who are medically challenged, and it's been this. My husband and I are like, how they just don't understand our worry about what could happen, and it's been very isolating for us. And it occurred to me that I am sometimes asking from those friends something they cannot give me. They cannot identify with me. And I'm glad for that. Like Wendy, you said, like if they could, then that would not be a great thing. I mean, there's been tremendous joy, but also tremendous pain. So I've been putting on them this burden and expectation and then feeling let down if they're not able to fulfill those needs. And I was like, I was hesitant to engage in this North Star Reach community of parents for the first 7 years Jack was after transplant. I mean, we could have been involved much earlier because I was like, I cannot even begin to talk to somebody else who has the same pain. But it occurred to me yesterday that this is exactly the place we need to be talking, because this is the place where you can where there are parents where you don't even have to talk about your pain because they get it. So you can put your burden on, your load can be that song, your load can be carried by people who understand, and you're not let down because you don't have to explain, you don't have to apologize, you don't have to do any of that. So I was like this big aha moment. I was like, oh my God,
yeah,
I do this such a long time ago. So yeah, and then one other thing about self-care. I don't know if anybody else experienced this, but like 3 years after Jack's transplant, I had to go to the dentist, and I had about 20 cavities. And the dentist was like, when was the last time you were at the dentist? I said, I have no idea. I was like, I don't even know if I brush my teeth every day. I can't even remember the last time I flossed. Like, it was very basic self-care, like brushing my hair. I had lost my brush. So over the past 3 years, I have a sticky note on my mirror, and it's like, brush your teeth. I'm like 4, like brush your teeth, floss your teeth, brush. In my car, I have a sticky note that's like, brush your hair. Like, just like very basic self-care stuff that falls by the wayside when you're just trying to keep your kid alive.
Well, and you also feel guilty. I mean,
so
even
guilty.
doing like the most mundane things. I remember
like brushing your teeth.
I had been in the hospital for like 5 months or something at that point. And I remember going to the grocery store and standing in the middle of the produce section of the grocery store. And I was so overwhelmed, and I was mad at all the people that I saw grocery shopping, because I wanted to scream at them. Do you have no idea there's this whole other world happening in the hospital with all these sick kids, and you don't even know it, and you're just picking out apples or whatever? Like, I was so overwhelmed, and I literally started crying in the produce section of Kroger, near Ann Arbor in that plaza, and I left. I could not even bring myself to grocery shop because of what I was watching every day for, at that point, 5 months of my life. And not just my kid, but, you know, we lived in the Ronald McDonald House. We saw, you know, Mary Ann and all these other families that you build relationships with, and you see them come and go, or you see them pass away. And it was just too overwhelming and too much to deal with. And, you know, just real quick to add on to like people's comments about, you know, it being difficult to share. And it's not even that I don't want to tell people sometimes, but it's so emotionally draining and overwhelming. Like, I don't even know where to start. That, for me, that's what it is. It's not that I don't want to share with people. It's so overwhelming.
It's too much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's painful.
Yeah.
When I was young, I told my mother everything. Now I don't tell her because I know how bad it hurts me. It's going to hurt her just as bad. So one of the we're about done. We have to wrap up. Guys, we could have this conversation for hours. What I want to tell you is Dr. Chris is our keynote speaker tomorrow, and I think that you should all try to join us because it will be very helpful. Nicole asks about how do you build community and friendship? So I met Vicki when she was a pastor, and she came to the hospital to pray for Faith. And I wanted to smack her when I met her because she was like, there's blessing in this. Faith was septic at the time, and I thought she was going to die. And she denies this whole thing, by the way, but it really happened. I wanted to kick her. But she sees she's denying it right now. But she said that to me. I tell the story all the time. But there's not going to be a ton of people that stick with you. Like, the reality of this, you'll have a few really good friends that will stick with you through the journey, but you won't have this monstrous community of people that will stick with you. But you need a Vicki, you need a Jenny. Jenny is my best friend. And I'm ignoring her right now. And part of the reason is my daughter can't see her friend. And I think, you know, in my head, I'm thinking, well, if I see Jenny, I mean, I haven't seen Jenny since March, and Faith hasn't seen Addie since March, and it's only fair. Like, it's almost like I feel like I have to suffer along with her. And I know that's messed up, but I also feel like it's not fair. It's not fair that I get to see Jenny and she can't see Addie. So I think that that's part of it. But one of the biggest reasons we're doing this is to start a community for all of you here. And this isn't going away. We're doing this care conference. This is our first annual. Next year, with any luck, the virus will be gone, and we'll be in person, and you'll be staying in cabins, and you'll be building relationships with one another. And we have these amazing.
I'm pointing out something as you're saying this, friend, because you harass me all the time about telling you about this being a blessing. But when you look at what you've just done for a community of people who really needed it. So God had the final word.
It's a blessing. Okay. But that we have these amazing support groups that are happening, and we've got spaces. Vicki's support group has space. Mine has space. We would love to have you join us. So we're continuing this. We're going to be here for you this whole year. This isn't a conference to get you all fired up and to tell you you need support and then not come back till next year. We have set up ways to support you throughout the year. And I'm sorry it's virtual because I had massage therapists ready for you guys. So just know we got to get this COVID taken care of. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.